I'm going to start today by stating the Pickens County Chamber of Commerce has a policy in place to not endorse political candidates or legislation. At this point, the primary goals of the Government Relations Committee are to educate and enlighten the public about legislation, the mechanics of the voting process, and pending issues regarding the county and its residents. While this policy may be altered in the future, there are no plans to do so at this time. Okay, is there any questions about the disclaimer? All right, well, very good. Well, I'm pleased to introduce District Attorney Joe Hendricks as the DA for the Appalachian Judicial Circuit. He serves Fannin, Gilmer, and Pickens County. Joe, if I say anything that's not correct, you straighten me out.
So far, you're right on target.
All right, well, good. I got it off your website, so it should be good. Joe graduated magna cum laude from Berry College with a degree in economics and political science. And then from Georgia State University College of Law, he also graduated. Joe, his wife Kay, and son John reside in Talking Rock. And I'm glad Joe is with us today. And please join me in welcoming Joe to Popcorn and Politics here at the Pickens County Chamber of Commerce. So, Joe, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, what I plan to do with you today, or at least what is the format as I've kind of been given it, is I'm going to just tell you a little bit about what my office does, what the role of the district attorney is, and then I'm going to talk about 3 to 4, just depending on the time of what I see as some of the issues that you hear talked about. I really see this as an information session because I think there are a lot of misunderstandings or probably incorrect ideas about. I hear different things floated out and that people don't understand, and it's easy to understand that because legal terminology is different than what most people use. And I always talk, when I talk to groups of non-lawyers, I don't like using legal terms or special terms of art, because I remember I sit on the Highland Rivers Community Service Board, and for the first 5 meetings they used acronyms that I'd never heard of before. And I'd have to keep stopping and asking, okay, what's that mean? What's that mean? What's that mean? And I don't like to do that. But let me tell you about the office. The district attorney is the chief prosecuting officer within each of the state's 49 judicial circuits. The state is divided into 49 judicial circuits. They range from one county circuits that you see, the county south of us in Cherokee is a one county circuit. We used to be part of the Blue Ridge Circuit, along with Pickens, Gilmer, Fannin, and Forsyth counties, and even a really long time ago, Cobb County was in the Blue Ridge Circuit. And Cobb County was split off to form the Cobb Circuit. And the only way I know that is because I've seen an old black and white photograph with pictures with the members of the bar from the Blue Ridge Circuit who had Cobb County Marietta lawyers on it. The judicial circuits, people often ask me why, how were they formed? Is it a portion based on population? There is an element of population and caseload that's done with that, but they were basically historical. The first circuit is the Eastern Circuit. The second circuit was the Western Circuit. Then we had the Northern Circuit, and you'll find a Southern Circuit. And you'll see in creation the South Georgia Circuit, the Cherokee Circuit, the Blue Ridge Circuit. You can imagine where the Cherokee Circuit was formed. It was formed in Cherokee lands as the whole issue with the Cherokee and the Trail of Tears and the settlement appeared. And then that was further subdivided into different circuits. And they typically, what happens now is if for a circuit to be split, there has to be a recommendation from the Judicial Council to the legislature, and then the legislature does that as an act of legislation. So they don't reapportion it. There's no reapportionment for judicial circuits. Typically they're just split when there's a decision made that it would be more efficient to handle the cases with a split circuit as opposed to leaving those counties together. And I'm referring to, the reason I'm doing this, I'm referring to a PowerPoint I usually do to explain the office some. So if y'all bear with me just a second, because my screensaver keeps popping up. There are, the largest circuit in terms of counties has 8 counties in it. I can't imagine what it would be like to travel to 8 counties to handle cases, but there are cases, circuits that do that. Of course, many of those counties are so small, they have court meetings twice a year, 2 or 3 times a year. Each district attorney is an elected state constitutional officer. Our office and duties are prescribed in part in the Georgia Constitution. Unlike the federal system, where the U.S. attorneys, which are our counterpart, which are in the executive branch of government under the United States and the federal system, in Georgia, district attorneys are in the judicial branch. So, for budgeting purposes and for many purposes, although sometimes we get referred to as officers with executive authority, for most purposes under Georgia law, we are considered to be in the judicial branch of government. And that's where you'll find us in the Georgia Constitution. The district attorney is responsible for the trial and appeals of felony and misdemeanor cases out of superior courts. Now, the Georgia court system is divided into 3 or 4 levels depending on how you want to classify it. The big difference is you have appellate courts, and those 2 appellate courts in Georgia are the Supreme Court and the Georgia Court of Appeals. You have trial courts, which are the court of general jurisdiction, and that unless the legislature has assigned jurisdiction of the case to another court, is superior court. It is the equivalent of sometimes in other states they call circuit courts. Here we call them superior court. The superior court has jurisdiction over exclusive jurisdiction over felony cases. In counties like Cherokee County, just south of us, in Cobb County, they have state courts which handle misdemeanor cases. And superior court, even in those counties, the superior court retains jurisdiction. Misdemeanor cases can be prosecuted in superior court. It's just they have a state court created, usually with a solicitor. Although in some places the DA acts as the solicitor in those state courts. So those are the 2 main trial courts. In Georgia, you have what sometimes are called inferior courts, but they're courts of limited jurisdiction. You have the probate court. For our purposes, probate court handles it's the initial place where traffic tickets go that are written in the county. If they occur in the city limits, they typically go to municipal courts, and each city usually has a municipal court, although sometimes they will contract with the magistrate court to handle their business. Then you have magistrate court. Magistrate court is important, especially in Pickens County, because they do have jurisdiction to try as non-jury. In other words, if a defendant wants a jury trial, it has to be transferred to superior court, but they do have jurisdiction to try a number of misdemeanors like disorderly conduct. I think they may even have shoplifting, misdemeanor marijuana cases, and certain cases like that. And we also, in Pickens County, we handle a lot of county ordinance cases in magistrate court. Now, in most places, the district attorney doesn't have any authority to prosecute county ordinance violations. However, the Commissioner's Office in Pickens County has an agreement with us where I've got assistant district attorneys who are appointed by him as county solicitors, and they handle those cases as county solicitors. They function as a county solicitor when they're doing that, not as an assistant DA. It only makes a difference for some technical reasons, but we handle that. We handle juvenile court. We're the prosecuting officer in juvenile court. We handle about somewhere between 600 and 800 juvenile delinquency petitions a year. And I have one assistant district attorney assigned to handle those cases for all 3 counties. In terms of case numbers, we run circuit-wide somewhere about, I've seen it anywhere from the high 1600s to the low 2000s in terms of superior court cases, new superior court cases that come into our office every year. And that's varied. It used to be a little bit higher than it is now. It's down a little bit. Let's see.
You say 1600?
Let me tell you about a few of the other duties we have. I mean, that's the typical duties of the DA, and that's what we're most known for. We do some oddball things, like we initiate the bond validation proceedings when a local government authority issues a bond. We actually file a petition to validate those bonds in Superior Court. Someone from my office chairs each of the child fatality review committees in Avery County. The child fatality review committee examines and does a review of every child death that's unattended by a physician, or that's, basically to see if there's something that could be done to prevent it, or if there are any preventative measures we can use in the future to try to stop it. I mean, one of the big things you've seen come out of that statewide is the Back to Sleep program, encouraging people to put their babies on the back instead of on the front, so that, to avoid SIDS deaths. We do also have a child support recovery assistant district attorney who is assigned to the Department of Human Resources, and they collect delinquent child support. And they're responsible for that, and I don't have their case numbers with me, but I know it's one assistant DA handles lots and lots of cases. The district attorney is a legal advisor to the grand jury. We not only present cases to them, but in their function as an oversight body to the county government, we function as their attorney and legal advisor. We handle asset forfeiture cases, and these basically two kinds of those. We have drug forfeiture cases where we seize and condemn property, basically drug dealers who are caught with drugs. We also have done some RICO cases where we've taken property from basically criminal enterprises. We handle traffic cases in probate courts, I've already mentioned. I'll tell you about my staff. I have 9 assistant DAs, 3 prosecute here in Pickens, 3 in Gilmer, 2 in Fannin, plus the juvenile court prosecutor. And then the child support assistant DA actually functions out of our office. He doesn't work in the same office as the rest of us. We have about 4 or 5 investigators who work in my office, 1 in each county to do the general, basically the legwork and gathering the evidence of the cases and tying up loose ends on cases that are presented to us by law enforcement agencies. We have a grant that funds a prosecutor who investigates crimes against women and children. We also have an investigator who does more of a white-collar crime and also identity theft, and he also runs our he's our what's called a TAC for GCIC. IC, our criminal information terminal, where we get criminal histories, and that's heavily regulated and requires somebody to oversee that. We also, there are about 5 investigators who are district attorney's investigators, but they are assigned to the drug task force. All the drug task force agents are DA investigators, and they're paid through a contract with the state. And we have administrative responsibilities and oversight for the drug task force. That's it in a nutshell in terms of our duties. I'll talk to you just a couple minutes, and I'll be glad to open for questions. I don't want to go too long, but I know y'all have questions. One of the things, I think we've done well, and it's a challenge and it's a burden at the same time. One of the things we've faced over the years, especially when the methamphetamine epidemic hit its peak in, I would say, 03, 04, 05, 06, was we just had an explosion of cases coming into our office. And one of the problems was the crime lab couldn't get us a crime lab report back on methamphetamine before the guy was out on bond and had committed 2 other offenses. So by the time we got the guy ready for his first jury trial, we got the crime lab back, and then was able to present it to the grand jury. He'd already been arrested 3 or 4 times. Well, that generates a lot of work. Fortunately, I think we've been able, because of our aggressive stance, I think all the law enforcement agencies have taken a very aggressive stance on methamphetamine. We took a very hard line on meth labs and trafficking of methamphetamines, and because of the anti-drug, anti-meth activities done by organizations like the Chamber and the Ministerial Association, that has come down, and it brought down our caseload, not just on drug cases, but on some of the family violence, some of the child abuse cases. It helped. Now, meth almost went to, I won't say went away, but it became very hard to get for a while. Unfortunately, it's starting to make a comeback, so we're gonna have to address that issue. So that's been one of the big issues in our office is the methamphetamine epidemic. What's kind of replaced methamphetamine for a while, it was prescription drugs, and I think prescription drug abuse is probably one of this community's biggest problems. The spice is a big problem, but it doesn't show up as criminal cases because so much of the, what I call spice or synthetic marijuana, so much of that it was made illegal. They altered the people making it would alter the chemical composition on it to avoid the statute. They passed a new statute, went into effect, I think, about the 1st of April. It wasn't about a month later, they came out with an entirely new chemical compound that mimicked the effects of marijuana or worse, and is out from under it. We've still been going in, making buys at these shops, or the DTF has, because what we found is that some of the new stuff had contaminated. It was contaminated with the old stuff, so it was clear they were using the same equipment to make it. So we're going to try to keep chipping away at that until the legislature meets again, is able to, I guess, ban a whole new class of chemicals that composes the synthetic marijuana. I think our child molestation and child abuse cases, especially in this circuit, still remain a big, not from a volume wise, but every one of those cases is a major case for us. I would say one of the big challenges we've had over the last 3 or 4 years, the budget cuts have been difficult. They've been difficult for 2 reasons. One is every state-funded position in my office was faced with monthly furloughs. Now, we just couldn't operate. We could not keep courts going with furloughs. So what we did is we didn't buy a new computer. We didn't buy a new anything. We took our operating money, which we get from the counties, and we were able to pay those assistant DAs to work that, continue to work. And we were still furloughed. The other problem, the way the budget's cuts have hit us, is I've got assistant DAs that were hired back in 2008, 2009, who were hired in as entry-level assistant district attorneys, making in the mid-40s to maybe upper 40s to low 50s. 5 years later, they're still making what a entry-level assistant DA makes. Well, you can say, well, they should be glad they've got a job, and I know people have said that in a recession, but I'll tell you what I'm going to face as a manager and somebody who's got to hire folks. When you get somebody who gets 5 years of prosecutorial experience, they become very marketable. I mean, the bottom line is they can go out and make a lot more money doing something else, and I'm going to be faced with retraining brand new assistant DAs. That hurts our productivity. It just does. It costs us money. I'd rather, and I hope the state's going to be able to give some raises to these folks. Otherwise, we're going to lose them. We will have trained them and sent them on their way. It's not a wise use of resources. I won't talk to you about, but I will talk to you about our productivity and caseload. I have charts. You can look at them. The first chart says Superior Court cases pending in the DA's office in the Appalachian Circuit. This is an amalgamation of our cases. These are superior cases that were going to Superior Court only. I didn't throw in the juvenile and magistrate court. We kind of hit a high point in the mid to high 4300s back in, I would say, between July and October of 2008. We're down at the end of 2011. We were down below 3,600. And then if you can look at, and I have them county by county. Now let me tell you a little bit, those are cases that aren't closed. Let me tell you a little bit about the numbers, what those numbers mean. For example, just right now, there are approximately 1,536 open cases that aren't closed in Pickens County. But let me tell you a little bit about those numbers. There are about 451 of those that are in some sort of what I'd call, they're not active on the docket. They are in a category. They're in about 4 categories. They're deferred. For example, right now we have about 83 cases of what's called deferred status. Those are cases that are in pretrial diversion, some form of pretrial diversion. In other words, we have an agreement with the defendant in some form or fashion. Some of those are drug court, and some of those are just regular pretrial diversion, where we've agreed that if they can behave and they pay certain costs, or they get certain counseling, or they do community service, or do some condition, and everybody's case is a little different, that will dismiss their case. And it's basically a second chance, especially for a lot of misdemeanor or low-level offenses. And then we also put the drug court folks are classified in our system that way. In other words, they have entered a plea of guilty. They are in the drug court program. If they successfully complete it, their case is dismissed. If they don't successfully complete it, most of them are looking at least a 2-year detention center sentence with no real opportunity for parole. So those aren't cases that are waiting for trial. So, and then we have another category, but we have about, for example, in Pickens County, 229 bench warrant cases. Those are folks who decided not to participate in the justice system after they were charged, and they were on the run. And some folks disappear into the woodwork, and you never see them again. They leave the state, they whatever, and then some of those will be caught, and they're we usually are able to resolve their cases after they're caught pretty quickly. We have about 140 cases that are dead docketed. We do that sometimes. Sometimes we have those. Sometimes those are old bench warrant cases. Sometimes those are cases where we've agreed to dead docket the case. A classic example are two neighbors who were fighting over. They may be fighting over a fence line, a property line, a dog. Who knows? And we've agreed that if they would behave themselves, we're going to put this case in the dead docket for a little while, and if you'll behave yourself, we'll dismiss your case, that kind of thing. So we got a few of those. So those are, you add those up, there's about, for example, in Pickens County, of that 1,500 or so cases, 1,563 cases we have pending right now in our office. About 451 of those are in some sort of, so you get that down, we're about 1,100 active cases. Now, active, we show right now about 800 or so that are on the trial calendar. The ones before that, they're in we'll present 60, 70 cases to the grand jury, or probably 100 totally to the grand jury, or we'll file misdemeanor accusations on these cases. So, they're in various stages. One of the things I think you'll see by this, we've really brought down the backlog tremendously over the last few years. Especially since, I would say, since beginning in 2010, we made significant progress, and I think we're going to continue to do that. It's not something you can turn around overnight, but it is getting better. And I don't know, I'm going to stop just talking and rambling. I'm going to let y'all ask some questions. I know you've got questions. I hope you have questions.
I've got one.
Yeah, Tim.
For those that don't know me, I am a practicing primarily criminal defense lawyer and have been since 2000 up here. Joe, let me ask you a question.
Mm-hmm.
Is the state of Georgia or the Board of Pardons and Paroles in any way restricting district attorneys across the state on how many people to send to prison, for an example, because of overcrowding? Are you
No, they don't restrict us. And really the parole and corrections doesn't have any control over the in. Let's just picture the prisons as having an indoor and the outdoor. They don't control how many come in, but they can control how many come out. Let me stop that. They do have control of this. What typically, where we've seen it back up, is where we sentence folks to prison, and we have a trial, or we enter a plea, and the defendant's sentenced to prison. They can leave them in the local jail, paying the jail some per diem for that inmate for some period of time before they pick them up. But in the sense of being able to restrict us, no. They can't restrict. The parole board is an independent constitutional body. They make their own decisions. They're actually independent of the prison system, which creates some interesting scenarios. But no, they don't control us. But we do look at when I negotiate a plea, I do look and consider what the parole guidelines are, because I don't, sometimes it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to try to get more prison time than what you can pretty much figure the parole board is going what they're, you know, how long they're going to hold.
Thank you.
I heard it. If you go to the Pickens County Jail, then most of the inmates that are in there on various charges of can be anything from petty theft to domestic violence to what have you. How much of those do you think are related more to drug problems and drug abuse than they are to anything else?
That's a good question, because the first question I've asked, and I think we forget to ask it, is did the drug use cause the crime, the other criminal behavior, or did the thinking which leads them to commit the other crimes also lead them to commit drug offenses as well? And I think sometimes that question's not answered. We've seen, and I think even in drug court, we've seen that there are some people who are truly drug addicts and who have an, I won't say uncontrollable compulsion, but they have a physical or psychological drive to use drugs. I mean, it's something they have to struggle to not do. And then you have some people that like to do it just because they like to do it. I mean, there's a couple different kinds of that folks. I think drug and alcohol abuse is related in some form or fashion to most of the people we see in jail. Most of the folks in jail have some sort of issue with drugs or alcohol. Now, which causes what? I haven't figured that out yet. I'm still waiting I'd still like to see a good study done on that. I don't know how you do it, but I'd like to see some good debate over which causes what. But I think drugs and alcohol almost always seem to be in the mix with most crimes that we deal with, in terms of volume anyway.
Your drug task force, is that in the region, or is that in each county?
We have the drug task force is funded by two sources. It's ultimately, it comes, there's federal money that's through what's called a Burns JAG grant that funds probably 60% or so of that, and then the rest comes as matching funds from the county. That's a cooperative effort between 3 sheriffs in the county and my office. And we also have on our board the chief of police in LJ. And they are adjuncts to and auxiliaries to each of the sheriff's office in their efforts to combat drugs. And they're a specialized unit that focuses on, officer pulls somebody over and finds a good bit of drugs in the car, they call a drug task force officer. Usually that DTF officer is going to try to see if they can talk to this person, find out where they got their drugs, see if that person's willing to work, and see if they can find the source of it. But that is in our circuit anyway. In Pickens, Gilmer, and Fannin, it's the Zellner Mountain Parkway Drug Task Force, and they cover these 3 counties. There are some other task forces that are bigger. There's a West Metro Task Force that covers maybe a dozen counties, but it depends on how the grant, each area has its own, typically has its own grant to fund its own local drug task force.
Thank you.
When the people go to the drug court and they go into the program, you were mentioning that there are several different kinds of drug addictions among these people. Do you find that one is easier to rehabilitate than some other kind?
I don't know. I'm not sure I'm the person, because I don't do the rehabilitating. I have the gatekeeper role for the program. We look at people to see if they're appropriate for it, and then we're the ones that's our primary role in it. From what I hear, I think they each have their own challenges. If you've got somebody who has a real physical addiction to an illegal substance, you have to treat that differently, obviously, than somebody it's just part of their overall behavior, and they like doing it. I think what I hear some of the compliance officers talk about, typically the ones who are easier to deal with are some of the more experienced ones, the older ones who sort of got to the point in life where they feel like they need to change the direction. it's the younger folks that tend to be harder. It's harder to change their direction. What I hear, sometimes they're just not. They still haven't figured out. They don't know everything yet. Some of the older guys who've been in trouble a good bit have decided that the way they've been living just isn't working out for them. Those are the ones who are easier to deal with, from what I hear. But
Do you know what the recidivism rate is
in drug court,
in drug court?
no, I don't.
Joe, let me ask you a question here. There's always, for years, been talk of, I guess, like preceding up to prohibition, there's a lot of talk about shutting down alcohol, making it illegal. What's your assessment if we did legalize drugs? What would be the impact?
Everybody can have an opinion about that, but I'm not.
You're the expert.
No, well, you know, trying to, that, I don't think any of us really know. I think it would be devastating.
It would be what?
I think it would be devastating. I think you would see, I think we would see, if we were to simply throw open the market to methamphetamine, if we were to throw open the market to things like synthetic marijuana. And by the way, we're actually getting a glimpse, I think.
Yeah.
Because you've seen what's happened, you know, the new class of chemical that's not now illegal in these synthetic marijuana and the bath salts and the different things. What have we seen? I mean, what have we seen on television or newspaper? We've read of some horrendous acts of violence and crime that go on because of that. Some people equate this to essentially ending prohibition with alcohol. I'm not sure the classes of chemicals we have out there, if we were to legalize those, that it would be like that. I'm afraid we would see an explosion in violence. I'm afraid we would see an explosion in child abuse. I'm afraid, that's what I fear. Do I have it? You know, nobody has real hard data. You'd almost have to do it somewhere and then see what happened. But that's just a territory I don't want to see us venture into.
I was just thinking, I didn't know whether there's been any research on this. We have more alcoholics now. Prohibition's over than we had during Prohibition. We did take a manufacture of the mafia during Prohibition, but I don't know whether we have more drugs.
You know, you did have legal. For example, cocaine was legal in the 19th century, but you had opium dens, and you had people who would simply waste large numbers of people who simply wasted away in opium dens. Families that were destroyed by the abuse of cocaine prior to the controlling of cocaine, prior to when the government began to control that, the use of that. So I don't know. I'm afraid, but I think even now that the marijuana, the cocaine, the methamphetamine, all of those classes of drugs now are so much more highly concentrated. They're so much more potent than probably what we were dealing with 100 years ago. I'm afraid that the impact that we had back then, the problems which led to controlling those substances back then, I'm afraid we would see. You know, a lot of people tell me, you know, why the war on drugs? We're never going to win it. You know, we're always continuing to fight it. My response is, what's the alternative? And I'm afraid that the alternative to fighting the distribution of these substances in our communities is greater instances of violence, greater instances of child abuse, greater instances of family breakup. I'm afraid we would see more kids, you know, falling by the wayside. You know, if it happens, I hope I'm wrong, but I don't want us to get there. I don't think we should wave the white flag of surrender in the war on drugs. I think we should. We may have to fight it differently. We may have to fight it smarter. We may have to do some different things, but I don't think we should surrender.
Okay, thank you.
I guess you're saying, Joe, that the cost to society is going to go up a good bit if you don't fight it now.
I think it would. Again, nobody's done an empirical study, as far as I know. to tell us what the result would be. And I know in some places they've legalized certain classes of drugs. You know, but I don't, when I hear people talk about real legalization, they're usually not just talking about marijuana, they're talking about everything. And you know, you see, for example, we see today, even to some extent, the abuse of prescription medications. I mean, prescription medications are legal. Obviously, they're prescribed. But when we talk about, we look, well, what do we have now? We have the wholesale abuse of those prescribed medications. And that's probably the most abused drugs. Not methamphetamine. It's whatever, the clonazepam or the hydrocodone, or it's stuff that's you can go over here to the drugstore and buy, actually have an insurance company buy it for you, and then take it home, and it gets, you know, when the need for it's over with, and somebody, you know, some kid gets a hold of it, the next thing you know, it finds its way to school, and somebody gets hurt. I'm afraid, I just fear the consequences. I think the consequences would be devastating. But that's one man's opinion.
Joe, let me ask you this, is there any one particular crime that, as district attorney of this circuit, just boils you beyond, I mean, it just really motivates you to?
The sexual abuse and molestation of children. I don't want to say too much because I don't want to get myself disqualified from a case, but it really makes me see red. And they're the most difficult cases to prosecute because I think jurors, generally, most jurors who find themselves on the case just can't imagine this set of circumstances occurring. Some of the factual situations you'll see or read about in a sex abuse case with a child are almost unbelievable to a rational, normal human being. But they happen. I know they happen.
Do you see the future of any increase in violent crime in this circuit? I know it's been a relatively low key as far as violent crime and murder, and that's been a good thing.
Well, actually, you know, point out we've had just recently as many as 5 to 6 homicide cases pending at one time. Now, and that's just recently. I just pled the Billy Gibbons case, which y'all probably saw in the paper. Double homicide in Whitestone. Guy got a life without parole. We just pleaded, and this shows you, this is a cross section. He was probably a guy in his 30s, I think, Billy was. Mr. Gibbons was. Mr. Bassa, who was 77 years old in Gilmer County, killed his wife. They were arguing over, I mean, something trivial, but obviously the marriage wasn't going well.
I guess.
But anyway, he's a 77-year-old man, pled to voluntary manslaughter, got a 20-year prison sentence for killing his wife. We had the Ivy case, which was kind of a bizarre, I won't even go into the fact situation on that, but it pled to voluntary manslaughter. It was an old case where somebody had been killed, and we found his bones up on the Gilmer side of Fort Mountain, and it was kind of a very unusual fact pattern. Just a year before that, we tried a year or so before that, we tried a son who had murdered his father. We can't, no real good reason for it. Tried that in Fannin. I've got a death penalty case pending here right now, and I've got motions July 19th and 20th that I'm working on. That's what I'm spending my work time doing is preparing for those death penalty motions. And that's, I don't want to say a whole lot about it, but again, a double homicide. We've had a lot of, for us, I know it's not what we would think of as big metro area crime, because they have a lot of that happens probably more often than what we're talking about. But for this circuit, we have seen what I think is an increase in murders and an increase in serious violence. You have to remember, you don't have to have big numbers to have a big impact. A small increase in serious violent crime can have a big impact in the community.
Let me ask you just the last follow-up question to that. Are you seeing an increase in some of this because of possibly the economic downturn, and maybe that's bringing up a rise in some of this?
Some of it. Now, the 77-year-old man who was on his pension, obviously that did affect it. But I think some of the others, yeah, I can think of two or three of those cases where there was some economic motive. And some motive as a result of job loss or inability to a shortage of income.
Were any of those murder cases, the assailants under the influence of drugs? That you know of?
One, there was alcohol there was alcohol involved. One here, no. I'm just kind of having to count them. One case, yeah, I'm not sure if that's what led to it or not. There's a whole lot of weirdness in that case. Anyway, there's a couple, yeah, and a couple not. I mean, I'll give you an example. One of the first murder cases I handled here was a murder case involving a woman who killed her old boyfriend, and she was an alcoholic. She had been found drunk living in a storage shed. Her old boyfriend brought her home with him to give her a place to stay for a few days until she cleaned up. The deadline he gave her to move out, she killed him. I don't think she was drunk at the time she did it. Now, she was an alcoholic, but so did the alcoholism have something to do with it? Yeah, probably did. But she had the influence when she did it. So it's one of those.
Apparently had issues with
Yeah.
it.
So, every murder case we've had almost seems to have its own very unique set of circumstances. They're not, it's not like I could give you a typical, there are a couple that are clearly out. We did have one that was clearly a couple of drunks fighting. We had a couple of those, or arguing or something, somebody got their feelings hurt during a drinking binge. Somebody went off, got a gun, brought it back and shot the other guys.
How about burglaries? You say meth has a big effect on burglaries a lot of times.
Meth has an effect. Meth is interrelated with burglary. It's closely tied to it in a couple of different ways. What you see is people go in and break in and steal from homes in order to then go out. They'll then find usually a drug dealer who will fence the property for them, and then the drug dealer will, whether it's scrap or whatever, turn around and sell it. But it's basically burglaries. In my experience, they're not typically done because somebody's high on meth and they're out of their mind. They go burglar out the house, but they're doing it to get more to finance the drug habit. And we've seen a lot of that.
Joe, you were talking about the situation with juries in child molestation cases and how most people don't usually understand that this is something that can occur and does occur more frequently than we would like it to. Do you think that that's a lack of education on their part? It seems that people are very, very naive when it comes to this kind of situation.
You and I probably grew up. I don't want to speak for others because some people have things that happened in there as a kid and they've overcome it and they don't talk about it. But the house I grew up in, it never would have occurred to me that either one of my parents, uncles, grandparents, anybody else would have abused me that way, me or my family. It just wasn't part of the thing. And so I remember when I got out of law school and became an assistant DA, and you would read the cases and descriptions of the way some folks lived. Not all people, but there's some folks who live, and you read what some of these children have gone through. This is not the kind of family that most of us grew up in. And it was until I had seen it over and over and over. Even I had some denial. This can't be the way people live, but it is, and it happens. And you talk about it. I don't know how you educate people on that, other than just seeing it on a regular basis.
Well, I know that in Appalachian, I think we are considered Appalachian for all intents and purposes, that in very remote situations, it's almost considered a rite of passage. It's like, well, my grandfather did, and my father did, and blah, 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 and it just goes down through the family. And
We have
it's
seen,
a change, it has to be a change in attitude and understanding for this to quit.
well, I think there are family dynamics like that. I don't think, and I think Appalachia gets a bad rap because I don't think
This
it's
is
this.
true.
I think there are a small number of cases that get magnified. The truth of the matter is that most child molestation cases, most sexual abuse cases, I see them occur in families who have moved here from other places and not from Appalachian regions. We've seen them in families that moved here from Florida. We see them in families that moved here from the Northeast. We see them in families who moved from metro or suburban areas. We see them in all classes of people. We see perpetrators who are well respected in their own little circles of influence. We see people who are well off who've engaged in this kind of conduct. We see people who are respected in their church and their religious establishments. They're respected in their jobs. We see that, and we've also seen what you've talked about. So I don't think there's just one single class of individual that does this. I think, and I think it's not just Appalachia where it occurs. Maybe that because we expect to find it more here, we actually look for it. Maybe we do a better job at finding it here than we do other places. But it happens everywhere. The worst case we've had, the absolute worst case I can think of right now, was perpetrated by a guy who was well liked and well respected by prominent members of the community. And you know, there was DNA evidence and everything else to show what he did. And he would not be your stereotypical, what people think of in that situation. That's not what happened. So.
Well, I don't mean to cast aspersions.
No, I'm not saying you are, but I think we do need to. But I think there is and that's part when you talk about jury education. That's one of the things. Sometimes people are expecting some really creepy looking, scary guy to be the child molester.
Right.
Sometimes the most respected, well-liked people have ended up being defendants in those cases, and we know they did it.
Was
George,
that?
what you've just said, oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Jim.
go ahead.
What you've just said is exactly what I was alluding to, is that people are not accepting that it goes across the whole spectrum of society.
I think you're right, absolutely.
And, it can't just be pinned on one little segment because it looks like this would be the place that you should go to look at.
And I think that's part of the problem.
I think we segment between sexual abuse and just violence with children, physical abuse. Most of us raise our children like we were raised, and I think there is a pattern there.
There's a family dynamic. Sometimes there is a family dynamic, but it's not necessarily what we think of. It's not stereotypical. I mean, they could come. A person could be from any cultural background.
Yeah, but a lot of cultures are more accepting of physical.
That's true.
Yeah, physical punishment that we don't really go for.
I was just curious, that gentleman you just mentioned, the upstanding member of the community, that he said that was probably one of the worst. Did he do something to a family member, or was it just step?
I think it was blended family type situation. And part of the problem may be, there is some, at least I've read, and I'm not no social science expert, there is some evidence that when you have, there is an increased risk when you don't, that's not the natural father living in the home. There is some evidence of that. And you don't want, not to say that there aren't many great step parents. I'm just saying there is some evidence, at least when I've read, that there's an increased risk for abuse when you have step parent situations.
It's probably not easy to get a jury put together for something like that either. I would think that would be tough duty.
Well, it is, because we individually interview each juror, and you get to hear how a lot of folks that you wouldn't expect were abused as children, and have faced that same circumstances. And it isn't easy.
You've been awarded for your stance on drunk driving. Congratulations
Well, thank
on
you.
that. That's a big deal.
Well, and the reason we've gotten, and I say I got the award, but I feel like my office got the award, is because we've taken a very, the truth of the matter is you're more likely, we talked about the murder cases, but you're more likely to get killed by a drunk driver than you are by a guy wielding a knife or a gun. I mean, that's the bottom line. And we've seen it. We've seen it happen. And we know that people die when drunk driving is not enforced. And we take the position, unless there's a really good reason we've got to do it, we don't dismiss or reduce those cases.
Just remember, we've got about 5 minutes before we need to wrap up, so I don't know if you want to conclude or if you want to continue.
Well, I'm happy with taking questions because I don't like giving a monologue.
Joe, do district attorneys have a batting average, i.e., how many people they take to court vis-a-vis how many are convicted?
Well, if you look, for example, at the number of people we have in pretrial diversion, those people successfully complete a pretrial diversion program, their case is counted as a dismissal. So I don't know if you count that as a win or a loss. To me, if we dismiss a case because we gave them a second chance and they decide to behave and become good citizens, that's a win. It's a win for them, it's a win for us. If you look at, and I don't have a list, we have a huge number, most cases that aren't resolved with pretrial diversion or are not dismissed. Some cases we look at and we say, well, there's just not enough evidence here. We have to dismiss them. Do you count that as a loss? I don't know. Do you count the slam dunk guy, the case is a slam dunk, he comes in and pleads guilty. Do you count that as a win? When anybody could win that case. Do you count the child molestation case that you took to trial because you knew it was the right thing to do, but the jury can't see it that way? Do you count that and they quit? Do you count that as a loss? I don't think so.
What you're saying is there really isn't any standard.
I don't think there's a standard. I don't know. In the conviction rate, we laugh about it at DA's meetings. What's the conviction rate mean? But to me, I think are the cases in general being resolved with an interest or an eye to justice, and I think that's what we shoot for in every case, is to resolving it in a way, whether it's through plea, whether it's a trial, whether it's pretrial diversion, whether it's some sort of alternative court program, whether it's simply, some young kid who gets in trouble and you say, we're going to let this warrant sit here for a while and see if you behave yourself, kind of a deal. We handle cases all kinds of ways with an eye to obtaining a just result, and that's the real standard, I think. And it's not an easy way to measure that, but I think you measure it, and I think one of the ways you measure how effective either your DA's office or sheriff's office is how safe do you feel when you live in your community. And I'll tell you, I live in Pickens County, my son goes to school here, my wife teaches school here. Overall, I feel like this is a very safe community.
Baseball would call it quality at bat.
That's right.
Instead of your batting averages,
Yeah.
So would you say along those lines then, would you say most of the crime, and I guess primarily the more violent crime, is really not random? So in other words, people here can feel pretty safe that they're not just going to be walking down the street and arbitrarily be attacked or something like that.
Yes.
Because it sounds like most of the crime has some type of relationship, certainly the murder cases.
Absolutely.
And
The case, I think of a case that stands out. I remember trying a kidnapping and then subsequent kidnapping and rape. One was kidnapped and raped out of the Gilmer County Walmart parking lot. A lady was going to work one morning. It was Thanksgiving morning. She was going to work, and some guy who was out on parole and had been convicted of probably about 20 prior felony convictions. It was random, but you know what? Did you know why that happened? It's because we had for whatever reason, the parole board decided to let out of jail a guy who'd been, literally, his recidivist count, where we listed it to the court, went on for, in his single space type for a page. And his criminal history was, that thick. The system failed because it had the guy in prison and they released him. So, yeah, the random acts of violence occur because when we start valuing we're less concerned about the safety of the public than we are about saving money and releasing people who are going to be violent and dangerous. And I know we need to be smarter with our prison dollars because there aren't as many to go around, but we do need to keep in mind that those who've been back into the system don't need to just
Well, that's the most frustrating thing for a citizen right there is you're chasing around all these people with these minor crimes and putting them in jail and taking up space for somebody. And then you let go a violent criminal who goes back and does it again. I think it just absolutely makes most people's blood boil.
It does make the blood boil, but you got to keep in mind the guy who's still committing the minor crimes is diminishing your quality of life, and small stuff leads to big stuff. We know that. This broken windows theory, Rudy Giuliani in New York City proved that if you crack down on the small crimes, you will improve your quality of life and bring down the big crimes too.
Well, what you're saying is, unfortunately, like most everything else, is the bottom line is funding.
To some extent. Now, we need to be smarter. We always need to look for ways to be more efficient and improve, give more value for what the dollars we do spend. But we've got to be careful about thinking we can save a whole lot of money when you take somebody who's been proven themselves. They've earned, the criminal law is society's lowest expectations. It's not the golden rule. It is the lowest expectations that we expect out of our fellow man. So we're talking about the people who consistently fail to meet society's lowest expectations. And if you can't do that, if you do that over and over and over again, I think you've sort of proven something. And we need to take them at their word and deal with it appropriately. Those folks
when you see people like this, that for not necessarily the same reason, but maybe a host of reasons. I mean, this is the third time or the fourth time you've been sitting here. Do you have any way of really taking them out of circulation?
There is Georgia's recidivist law lets us avoid parole. It takes it out of the jurisdiction of the parole board, and in appropriate circumstances, we use that.
I don't believe in life, necessarily want to lock them up in life, but you could turn them loose when they're 70, 75 or something like that. They're not going to do much damage.
Not that old guy that just killed his wife. And got
77.
20 years, he was 77.
Artist, is there something going on?
Well, maybe what if Charles is beginning to make the calculations?
Well, listen, I think on that little humorous note, why don't we go ahead and wrap it up? We're right up against the time.
Okay.
Judge, certainly we appreciate you coming out today. It was a very good session. I certainly appreciate everyone coming out and participating in this. And again, thank you so much, and we'll close that.
All right.